محمد وين هو يا رسول الله محمد لين يا نبي.
When some of us try to imagine our dear Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, we tend to think that maybe he was someone that was always spending his time in the cave meditating, or someone who was far away from the people, living a monastic lifestyle or an ascetic lifestyle. But that couldn't be further away from the truth. The Prophet Muhammad was someone who was very deeply involved in the lives of the people, of his community and society, especially when it came to the people who were sick or poverty-stricken or weak. He used to defend these people by any means he could. He would fight against the oppressors in defending these people, so much that many of the elites of Quraysh would not follow the Prophet because they would say the only ones who follow him are the weak and the poor. That was the reputation given to Islam at the beginning, because the Prophet Muhammad was someone who was very involved himself. He would go out to these poor people and these weak people and tell them about Islam and bring them himself. He was not like the politicians living in their ivory towers, having their secretaries and workers do their bidding for them. No. He himself would go out. He himself would go and he would have objectives, and he would pull up his sleeves and he would get to work himself. He would build the masjid himself. He was one of the brothers building the masjid. And when he entered the masjid, anyone else who entered in that was visiting Medina, when they would see the group of the Muslims, you know what they would say? They would say, which one of you is Muhammad? Because they couldn't tell the difference. Because he would dress like everyone else, and he would speak like everyone else, and he would sit on the ground like everyone else. You see, someone could be of the closest proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but at the Zahir level, on the surface level, you couldn't tell because of how modest he was, because of how humble he was. And so Imam Ali alayhi salam describes the way that the Prophet would live his life. He would say that he was a doctor that would search. He would go around often looking for patients to heal. He was a healer. He wanted to heal the people. And the word that Imam Ali alayhi salam used to describe this healing of the Prophet tells us of how often he would do it. He says, كَانَ طَبِيبًا دَوَّارًا بِطُبِّهِ, that he was a doctor, dawaran. He didn't say yaduru. Yaduru means he would search. He did it once, twice, 3 times, but dawaran, it's on the weight of fa'al, which means he was often engaged in this action. He would often be doing this. He was always looking for someone to heal. He was always looking, searching. If no one came to him, he would go to them. He would go to who was sick. He would go to who was spiritually sick, poor. Someone might be rich and wealthy on the outside, but their hearts might be dying. He would go to that person to heal their hearts. He would look himself. He would actively search for the people to bring them to God. And he made the people feel like he was one of them. Even though they knew he was their leader, the way in which he acted was that way. The way in which he lived was that way. That's why after the battle of Hunayn, when the Muslims were returning from the battle, and this was the first battle after the Fatah of Mecca, when many of the Quraysh who were previously enemies of Islam had now become Muslim, the Prophet, he gave the war booty to the people of Quraysh, to Abu Sufyan and the previous enemies. They took all the sheep and goats and animals. They took all the wealth and money. And the Muslims that had been there from the beginning didn't get any of those riches. And so the Ansar, the people of Medina, who had always been there for the Prophet and had been with him in all the battles, they started to feel a type of way. They felt sensitive. Why did the Prophet give them the riches? He didn't give us anything. Could it be because he favors them because they're from his tribe of Quraysh? Unfortunately, they had that bad opinion. And one of them told the Prophet about it. And the Prophet felt disappointed. And he said, do they all feel that way? And unfortunately, they were very embarrassed, but they said yes. So he said, gather the Ansar. So the Ansar came. And the Prophet said, I've been told that you all feel like maybe I have favored the Quraysh upon you, because they're from another tribe and I've given them, they're from my tribe and I've given them the riches. Is this true? And they all stood there, ashamed, but they said yes. And then the Prophet Muhammad reminded them, and he said, were you not a people who were divided and you were unified through me? Because they were always at war. When the Prophet came, they became brothers. And then the Ansar began to cry. And they said, Bala ya Rasulullah. We were divided people. And when you came, we became united. And were you not a misguided people? The Prophet says to them, were you not a misguided people? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided you through me. And they cried and said, Bala ya Rasulullah. That's true. We were misguided. And were not your hearts filled with anger? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala healed them through me. They would cry. And then the Prophet said, wait, why don't you say to me, Ya Rasulullah, were you not someone who was exiled from his land and we gave you a home? And they cried even more. He didn't want them to feel bad. Then he told them, Ya Rasulullah, were you not alone and you became victorious through us? And they would cry even more. He wanted them to see that you have given me just as I have given you. He didn't make them feel bad. In the beginning, one might think he was making them feel that way, but then he told them, no, you have always been there for me. All of you have always been there for me. You've been there for me from the beginning when I had no one. You can tell me, Ya Rasulullah, when you had no one, we came to your aid. When you didn't have a home, we gave you a home. This is the modesty and humility of the Prophet. Then he told them, I gave them the riches because their iman was weak. They're people of dunya, I still need to train them. But I had high expectations of you because I've been training you for years. You're my brothers, you've been with me. So I figured they get the riches of the war, but you get Rasulullah. I'm one of you. I'm going back to Medina with you. My home is with you. This was supposed to be the gift that I thought you guys wanted. And they cried even more. They said, this is gift enough. There's nothing better than this gift. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us the greatest gift in you, Ya Rasulullah. But do you see the way in which the Prophet taught them that lesson? He didn't make them feel bad and ashamed and told them, after everything I have done for you, this is how you repay me? No, he told them, listen, you guys have all been there for me from the very beginning. That right now, that's how he taught them the lesson. He didn't make them feel bad. He reminded them that I've always been one of you. That is a leader with humility and modesty, as someone who is infused in his community, which teaches through his life experiences.